So today we are going to talk about image production, basically how to capture an image. So our learning competencies today would be to produce image manually using different mediums, and we will also apply image composition principles and techniques to production of images using different formats. For our values competency, we will put into practice suggestions for self-improvement, and for the 21st century skill, media literacy, understand and utilize the most appropriate media creation tools, characteristics, and conventions. So let's have our motivation first. Now look at the three different images. Let me ask you, which is pleasing to the eyes for you and why? So I want you to use the chat box and tell me what you think. Now, all of those images, they are mainly produced using a digital camera. So if we are going to talk about digital camera, we might as well talk about what digital photography is. It is actually defined as a form of photography that uses electronic photo detectors to form an image. In contrast, there's what we call analog photography. The analog photography uses analog cameras, not digital cameras. If you have older cameras at home, which uses films, those are analog cameras. Now, aside from a camera, can you think of other ways on how to produce an image? So again, use the chat box. Tell me what you think. Can you think of other means, other ways on how to produce an image file? Now, aside from a digital camera, we can also produce images if we will scan them using a scanner. So you just put your picture on the scanner, and then the machine will scan it and reproduce it digitally. Or we may also play a video and get a still image from that video. And then another technique is if we will use multimedia creation softwares like Photoshop, Illustrator, or InDesign. Those three can produce digital images as well. In your computers, I want to ask you, do you have an idea how to capture images or how to generate an images from your desktop? This is the same method as capturing a still image of a video. So use the chat box, answer me. Do you have any ideas how to capture your screens, turn it into an image? Now, other methods could also be employed, like getting images from the internet, from the web. You just Google a keyword and images may appear using Google Images. But there is one problem. If we continue to use these Google Images, we continue to use materials from Google, what usually is the problem? Can you tell me in the chat box what can be the problem if we use Google Images? We use image sets from Google and we do not give credit to the user who made the image. Okay, one problem, and the biggest problem, is about copyright. Normally, there's what we call a copyright infringement. But what is copyright? By definition, it is the exclusive legal right to reproduce, publish, sell, or even distribute a, let's say, an artwork or a literary piece or any product which you created. But the thing is, if someone buys the copyright from you, then that person will be the legal owner of the product. Now, by definition, why do you think copyright is important? Tell me using the chat. Well, basically, copyright is important because it protects you from other people who might abuse your product. Just imagine, let's say you created a musical beat and you are so proud of your work, you uploaded it in YouTube, and then there's another person who will get that musical beat and use it in his film. But he did not inform you that he will be using it. He did not give proper credits to you as the creator of the beat. So he made money out of it. And you, as the legal owner, you are left with nothing. But with copyrights, if your material, your product is copyrighted, you may settle it in court. You can sue the person who took your product without any consent. That's how important copyright is. And all of these, if we are going to produce images, might as well learn how a camera works. So look at the picture. A camera is actually dependent on light, much like our eyes. So when a light is reflected from an object, it will bounce to the lens. Well, actually, just a bit of information. Do you know that what our eyes see are actually reflections of light from the object? And that's why if there's no light, we cannot see anything. But if there is light, the light rays will bounce off the object we are looking at and it will enter our eyes. Much like cameras. Actually, cameras are based on how they work. They are based on our eyes, the human eyes. So when the light gets reflected from the object, it will enter the lens. Now, once the light is in the lens, the aperture, this one, the aperture, it controls how much light enters the lens. So you see something like an iris here. It can get smaller or it can get bigger because it can control how much light gets in. And then we have the shutter. The shutter is like our eyelids. So the shutter has a time when to close, how long before it closes. Essentially, it also controls how much light will enter. So the shutter, the longer time before the shutter closes, then the more light will get in. And that amount of time the shutter is open, and that's the time when the light gets into this one, the sensor. So these three, let's talk about it more. First, the shutter. There's such a thing we call as shutter speed. Like I've said, that's the amount of light allowed in the camera. And the amount of time the shutter is open is called actually the shutter speed. The longer the shutter speed, the more light will enter the sensor. So if there is more light, it doesn't necessarily mean the image will get clearer. It's just that there's more light entering. And one of the tips for beginners is when you capture images at night and when you are using the manual mode with your digital cameras, the shutter speed must be longer so that more light will get into the camera. Even in automatic mode, when it's automatic mode, the digital camera will be able to determine if it is nighttime. Therefore, the digital camera will set the shutter speed to a longer degree. So next, let's look at this image. The image here tells us about the shutter speed. These are the different shutter speeds. But basically, ito din yun. They are actually measured in seconds. So this one is 2 seconds. This one is 1 second. This is half of a second, 1/4 of a second, 1/8, and so on and so forth. Now, I want you to look at the numbers from 2 up to 1/2000. I want you to relate it with these images, these 3 images. What does that tell us about the shutter speed? So think about it. When you have longer shutter speed, like here, 2 seconds, it means that more light will be able to get in, but the downside is if your target is moving, the target will become blurry. The background, look at the background, it's not blurry because the background is not moving. At the same time, when you have a longer shutter speed and your hands are moving, it will produce a very, very blurry photo. But if you have a fast shutter speed, like what's mentioned here, freeze motion, since the shutter speed is only 1/2000 of a second, the capturing is very, very fast. The subject will remain in place and it will be more focused. You will be able to get a crisper photo. So that's how shutter speed works. Faster, a freezing motion, a very, very fast snap, longer shutter speed, slower. If the subject moves, it may become blurry, but more light will be able to get in. And then we also have the aperture. Now, the aperture, like I've said earlier, it also determines how much light gets in. But the thing is, with apertures, it's not only about how much light gets in. The aperture is more concerned with how wide the opening of the lens is. Now, this opening and closing of the lens or the iris, it controls what we call the depth of field. So what am I talking about? Let's look at this. By the way, the aperture is also called an f-stop. Now, levels of aperture are called f followed by the number. So look at f1.8 and then the image. Look at f18. Look at the image. Now, can you tell me what is the difference between the two photos? If you will look closely, the background of this one is very blurry. But the background of this one is actually sharp. It has something to do with the aperture or the f-stop. If you have smaller numbers for f-stops or aperture, chances are the background might become blurry. If you have bigger aperture, chances are your background will be crisper. So where does the depth of field come in there? Let's say you have this person who is taking a shot. And then here is you posing. If you have a shorter aperture, the depth of, let me just show you the distance. This is the distance. If you have a shorter aperture, the depth of field, wait, let me change the colors. The depth of field is right about here, meaning the one in blue will be the area of focus, and then the rest will become blurred. The focus will be on this area. But if you have a bigger aperture, bigger aperture means bigger depth of field. So when you have a bigger depth of field, the focus will actually be bigger. So the effect is nothing will get blurred. Everything will be on focus, just like in this image. Because the depth of field is big, the images at the background were also focused. Let's look at this. This is what I'm talking about. Smaller number in f-stop or in aperture. You have a small depth of field, therefore the background will become blurred. A bigger number in aperture, nothing will get blurred. But in connection to the shutter speed, if you have a smaller aperture, most probably your shutter speed will also be slower. If you have a bigger aperture, if you have a small aperture, your shutter speed might become faster. So all you have to remember here is a smaller number in aperture actually means that the lens is opening up. But if your aperture has a big number, the lens is actually getting smaller. Next, we have the ISO. The ISO controls the sensitivity of the photo detecting sensor. It determines how sharp the image can be or how blurred the image can be. The lower ISO number the sharper the image will become. Look at this. One image is taken, or two images are taken based on the same object. This one used a smaller number of ISO. The image is clear. The other one used a bigger number of ISO. The image became grainy. So what I'm trying to say here is using a manual setting in a digital camera, using the aperture, the shutter speed, and this ISO, they must blend together to produce a quality image. For any given setting, those three must be manually set. But I'm not expecting you to be able to do it right away, or I'm not expecting you to become experts at it at this point. When using cameras, you might use the default automatic setting. It's fine with me. But if you want to experiment, I've taught you how to change the settings of your cameras so that you may produce clearer, sharper images depending on the environment. Now, moving forward with capturing images, we must talk about how you will be able to capture better photos. And I've listed several techniques that you may employ as beginners to produce a more enticing image. Let's look at the first one. It's what we call the rule of thirds. This is actually my most used image composition principle. The image on the left is a normal image, while the image on the right uses what we call the rule of thirds. Can you use the chat and tell me, what do you think the rule of third means? Now, the rule of thirds, it states that in a grid, you will be able to divide it into three parts, horizontally and vertically. So basically, you are creating a 3x3 grid like this. You have a 3x3 grid. And in rule of thirds, a subject must be placed on the different spots that I am encircling. So the subject must be in 1/3 of any grid. So like for this example, the lady is located on this space. This is 1/3 of the image. So the lady is placed on the left side, the left 1/3 of the image, and her eyes are actually placed on the intersection, which makes the image look more enticing, or it produces a better image. Next, we have leading lines. Now, leading lines, it uses lines which may appear to point at something, or it may produce something like a pattern. Look at the images. There are drawings of lines already for for those leading angles, and this makes the picture look better. Look at this one. because of this leading line, the leading line consists of the edges of the wooden board, even the bars, even the edge of the stairs. Since it uses leading lines, the photo looks better. The image on the right too, it uses leading perspective lines. If you know what perspective drawing is, it has a vanishing point. So the lines lead to a central point, which is this one, where the person is, where the subject is. Okay, next, we have symmetry or pattern. Look at this image. Look at how the people are aligned. So they are very symmetrical. If you will cut it in half, this side, the placing looks like the right side. Actually, there are also leading lines there. These are leading lines. And based from what I have said, you may now think that other composition principles may also appear in other composition principles. So you may use more than one composition principle. Look at this image, this one. Is this symmetrical? No, it's not symmetrical. But we actually call this as asymmetrical. Meaning different symmetry. So this one is bigger compared to the other one. But it makes perfect sense. The image looks better for it. And then there is another image composition technique which will be mentioned later, which is called contrast. Okay, moving forward first with this one, the technique used here is pattern. So if you can see, there are patterns created from the tire. So because of the patterns, images are better looking. So filling the frame is the next one. Filling the frame. Normally, when we take photos, we place the subject at the center, like the whole body or the whole face. Filling the frame does the opposite. Filling the frame means that the camera will be zoomed in on a particular detailed subject. In this case, the eyes of the zebra. And of course, the head of the zebra will not fit the camera, but instead it will be zoomed in so that only the eyes will be the focus. And then there is what we call framing. Framing is using a frame or creating a frame within the picture. So look at this. Look at the hands of the person. He created a frame so that your focus will become, or your focus will be placed inside the boat. If you can remember the first image that we used, there is, I think, a garden. There is a flower, and then there's a fence, and it has a circular thing. The circular thing in the gate became a frame. So it's an example of framing. And then there's what we call the contrast, like I've mentioned earlier. What is contrast? Colors will be contrasted. Look at this image. The background is blue while the foreground is yellow. So two different colors bumping against each other. Therefore, one of the colors will, well, in Filipino term, lulutang. So if there is one color that will stand out, it will be the focus of the image. Just like, or let me go back. Like this one. The background is orange, but the subject is in dark colors. So you will be able to see immediately the subject. Now this one, it's something like that as well. The background is orange. The subject is black. And in a way, there is also framing here. All right. So after doing everything, after doing all those photos, we must be able to transfer our images to a computer. So how do you transfer images from your cameras, from the digital cameras into a computer? First is via USB. So you connect your digital camera to your computer, and probably you might need an application software so that you will be able to transfer the images into your computer. If you are using the phone, you may connect it via USB. There are phones which can transfer immediately into the computer, but there are also phones who need an application software to transfer. But there is also an option to transfer photos using the cloud. So from your device, from your phone, you upload images to, let's say, Dropbox or Google Drive or even iCloud, OneDrive. And then once it's uploaded inside the cloud, you may use a computer to get it from your different cloud services. And the purpose is, if the images are inside your computer, they are primed to be edited using our software Photoshop. Because the next topic that we will be talking about is how to edit those images and enhance it, or to make it suit our needs. Okay? So I'll be giving you and leaving you with an activity, and this activity can be your homework. So I want you to take 3 photos. You use any of the composition techniques mentioned, and then once you are able to capture the photo, transfer it to your computer, and then submit it in Schoology. Do not forget to indicate which composition technique or techniques you used in the photo. Okay? So in this activity, you may use your cell phones to capture your subject. Any theme, any subject will do. If you want, you may ask your relatives, your siblings, your parents to be your subject, or you may be the subject yourself. What else? In Schoology, I will open an assignment submission for this one. This is a formative activity, so I will be giving comments, and you must get ready, or you be ready for comments for improvement. Okay, so let's talk about now, or wrap everything up, I want you to tell me what are the three elements in our cameras that can greatly affect your image. So you remember the thing we talked about, how the camera works. So after the light bounces from the subject, the reflection will get into the lens, and then what are the three three items, three elements inside the camera that will affect how the image is produced. And then next, why is it important to follow the suggestions of image composition techniques?